Hello students, in this video lecture I'm going to quickly cover off how everything needs to be put together over the next several weeks to complete your research project. This is the full scope review that takes you from preparing your outline all the way through to getting your final draft in. Because this is a 100% online class, those of you who want to work ahead can actually finish your research project if you're comfortable and have all of that ready all at once. From the syllabus, you'll recall that points are awarded in 5 areas for your research project. 25 points are awarded for the outline, which is up first. 10 points are awarded for meeting all of the deadlines. 3 points for getting your outline in on time, 3 points for getting your almost finished draft in on time, and 4 points for getting your presentation in on time. The almost finished draft is worth 40 points out of the 150. The class presentation, or because this is an online class, your video presentation is worth 50 points, and the final research paper is worth 25 points. These are the deadlines for the summer 2014 semester. As already noted, most of you will have watched the video lecture from Module 9, and you'll have seen how to do the outline as I prepared it in that video. If you haven't watched Module 9 video, you're getting out of order, and you need to go watch that first, because I'm not going to cover off the outline in a lot of detail in this video, because my assumption is you've already watched the Module 9 video lecture. When you go onto Blackboard and you drill down from the Content Research Project folder into the Outline folder, this is what you'll see there. The first document is the template that I referred to in Module 9. The second item in the folder is the video lecture on writing a good hypothesis, and the third item in the folder is a video lecture on drilling down to a unit of analysis, and I'll show you where those videos come into play here. This template here is your outline template. Remember, it's in 10 parts, and it was covered off in Module 9. This is what I went into in detail, and this will help you get everything ready for a good outline and get that submitted to me. Okay, at this point we're ready to get into learning a little bit more about how to do the presentation, and you'll find out by watching this section here how the presentation, how by working on the presentation simultaneously with your almost finished draft, everything comes together and flows with this natural narrative that will take you from your problem statement all the way through to your methodology and your conclusion in both your presentation and your written report. So as it relates to doing your presentation, the first slide which you'll want would be your title slide, and the title of your research paper, and your own name would appear on here somewhere, wherever you want to do it. You don't have to follow my templates, but these are just what I do for my FAU presentations. You start off your presentation with the hook. We call it the hook because what it does is it defines the problem in a way that makes it compelling. What gives the problem a sense of urgency? What solution are you suggesting might work? In your written report, down here at the bottom in yellow, you'll see where this presentation element comes from, or if you're doing the presentation first, which is the way my brain works, because I'm a very visual person, I do my presentations before I actually start writing my document. So this is what I want you to do. If you're a person who likes to write first and then do the presentation, focus on what's down here in the yellow box at the bottom, and then think about, while you're writing that, what am I going to put up in my presentation? So either way, I'm going to start by doing my slide presentation and describing what I do, because that's my brain's trigger mechanism for writing. So in your written report, your hook will be a half-page abstract. So I want your abstract to be about a half a page long when you're doing your almost finished draft and your final report. Next, you expand your problem. And without actually using the words unit of analysis, this section will nevertheless make it very clear what your unit of analysis is going to be when you identify it in your hypothesis. So other ways that you expand the problem is you embed in here who and what your unit of analysis is. You talk about who all is impacted by this problem, and you see a possible cause and what other solutions have been tried. So this may be 2 or 3 slides in your presentation, but in your written report, this will be summarized as a full-page introduction. So this is how you're going to introduce your paper in the actual written work. And here in your presentation, you're going to expand the problem with a few slides. Once again, this is where that bottom item in the outline folder of Blackboard comes in, because a lot of people have trouble identifying their unit of analysis. This video lecture here is a whiteboard presentation that I did several semesters ago to help you students drill down and find your unit of analysis so that you're actually very, very focused on it before you start your presentation and your almost finished draft. So watch this video if you're having any trouble at all with your unit of analysis. As a matter of fact, just watch the video and it should help you become very, very focused on your unit of analysis. The next slide that you want to work on is your theoretical approach, the next slides or set of slides. Are you going to approach this normatively and talk about what should be? Are you going to approach this descriptively and talk about what is? Or are you going to approach this prescriptively and talk about what might be if things were to change? And then you could talk about, if you're talking normatively about what should be, then you're going to make a compelling argument for saying, you know what, we don't have this right now, but we should, and this is why. Because it's a normative approach. Prescriptively is very different by saying, you know what, we're not going to follow what always has been or what seems to be normal. What we're going to do is we're going to go for something that's really, really unusual that nobody's really tried before. And really, we have to, if you're going to go for a prescriptive approach, you're going to have to describe things the way nobody else has described them. So this is describing what might be if we take a radical, different change approach. Descriptively, all you're doing is you just look at something and you're going to describe it in more detail. This is what we have now, and I'm going to describe it in detail so that we have a much better understanding about it. So pick one of these and name it. In your opening paragraph of whatever you're going to introduce this section as, you're going to say, this is a normative approach. This is a prescriptive approach because. This is a descriptive approach, and we're going to look at. Okay, so in your written report, this section will open a new research design section immediately preceding your literature review. You're going to describe in very short, half a page research design section of your paper what you're going to do in this regard, and then after this is described, you're going to go into your literature review, which will be supported by what you just described here as your theoretical approach. And then you introduce your research question. In your written report, this will typically be summarized as a half-page statement immediately following the introduction and immediately preceding the theoretical approach on the hypothesis section. And so this is the section in the presentation that can move around. Sometimes the research question cannot be asked until you have introduced your hypothesis or your hypotheses. Do not just assume this is the right place for your research question. So where does it fit? Ask yourself, oh, okay, do my readers have, or does my audience have, enough information to understand why I'm asking the research question that I am? And if they don't, you have to move this section around until it's in the right place. Because you have to give your audience enough information so that these questions or this question makes sense to them. So then you word the problem statement as a question that your research proposal will specifically answer. This is the most difficult part of the whole assignment. And it took me forever to come up with my research questions for my dissertation. And they are typically one sentence long, and there can be two of them if they're very, very closely related. Or if you're approaching your problem from two different angles like I am, I ask one question which says, oh, okay, can I solve this question by coming in from this angle? And can I solve this question by coming in from this angle? And my solution is my prescriptive approach will solve both problems. So I ask a research question from two different angles, and then my dissertation brings them together as two problems that have one solution. And so that's the way you have to look at a research question. And then you need to ask, are you doing an inductive sequence or a deductive sequence? So a paper follows a narrative, a presentation follows a narrative. And is that sequence an inductive sequence where it suggests that if you try this approach or if you follow this logic in your reasoning that I'm going to present in this example, the probable outcome will be blank? That's an inductive approach. Let's do this and this and this and this, and the probable outcome is going to be this. Nobody's done this before, but I'm using the research of others to support my theory that this would be the outcome. A deductive approach suggests that if premise A is true and premise B is true and premise C is true, then my research supports that this will be a logical outcome. So one, you're trying to say, let's do this and build on it, build on it, build on it in a sequence, and the other is saying, we've got this issue here, we've got this issue here, we've got this issue here, and so we probably have this situation here that nobody has actually described. Prescriptive approach is typically more useful with a deductive analysis, and an inductive approach is more in keeping with a prescriptive analysis. So the logic that you cover with this slide does not go into your written report per se, but rather is embedded into the wording of your hypothesis. So what you're going to describe, your research questions will set it up, like setting up a volleyball for a spike. If you're playing as a team, one person sets the ball above the net and the next person spikes it. This is what an inductive or deductive sequence or approach is used to set the ball, but your hypothesis is what actually spikes the ball. And so you have to really work into this, and you have to think, oh, okay, which approach am I taking, and stay with it, because if your narrative is choppy, it's not going to be a really easy read for your audience. So now your hypothesis comes in. In your written report, each hypothesis will be summarized in a paragraph, then immediately followed by the single sentence statement of your hypothesis, H1. And I put if-then as a hypothesis thinking. I want you to think in terms of, if this is happening, then this is the outcome. If we do this, that would be a deductive approach. If this is happening, or a prescriptive analysis, if this is happening, then this is to be expected. If you're doing a prescriptive analysis, you can say, if we do this, then this is likely. Okay? So don't actually use if and then in your hypothesis unless you really want to. But think of your hypothesis as having those two elements in a single sentence so that you are making a claim. Because your hypothesis has to make a claim. Your alternative hypothesis has to make some kind of a claim, because that's the straw man that you're going to set up to knock down. So you claim, this is my claim, let's see if I'm right. So if I make this claim, then this will be what we're testing for. So think of it in that way. Your hypothesis, as far as it comes to your presentation goes, following the reasoning set out in the previous slide regarding whether you are going with an inductive or deductive reasoning, present your hypothesis as, like I said, an introductory paragraph that lays down the preamble. You saw in the midterm I did a preamble. So before you state your hypothesis needs a preamble that introduces all of the circumstances that you're setting it up. And then you actually state in one single sentence your hypothesis. And your null hypothesis has to be the absence of this claim, not the opposite of. Because the opposite of this claim is another claim. So don't fall into the trap of making two alternative hypotheses. Make a null hypothesis and then state your claim about your alternative hypothesis. To help you on the hypothesis, as noted in the outline folder on Blackboard, there is a video that is a whiteboard lecture that is about preparing a good hypothesis. So if you need more help on that, go into the Blackboard section where I've highlighted this under outlines and find this video and watch that. Both the videos are about 8 minutes. Okay, the research questions, if you didn't present them before the hypothesis, if you needed to state your hypotheses before your research question made a lot of sense, then your research questions may be here in your presentation. Okay, so watch where you put the research question based on how much preamble you need to actually set up for your audience. Then you get into the literature reviews. Don't ever call it, I don't ever want to see literature review #1 anywhere in your paper. It's one of the most common mistakes that students make. They give a header or a section header in the written paper, or they call their slide title the literature review #1. I don't want to see literature review #1, literature review #2 anywhere in any written work or in any presentation. Use a useful introduction heading and section heading for what the literature review is going to present to me as a reader, because I need to see the flow that says, okay, here is my narrative, and I have this narrative arc that I'm going through in my presentation and in my written work, and I'm following this narrative arc, and the next section is, and give me that, the next section is whatever your literature review is going to support. So explain your secondary research, going over each topic and publication or author in a logical sequence. A really good peer-reviewed publication article that supports your problem statement and or suggests a logical sequence in your inductive or deductive reasoning should take up about a page in your finished research project report. Should not be anything less than a page, because this is the important foundation that you're building all of your methodology on, and your solution to this problem, or your idea or your theory is built on this foundation. So give it a full page, maybe a page and a half for each one of your literature reviews. So literature review number 2 follows behind it. Do not use a header title, literature review number 1, literature review number 2 in your review section. Give each section a meaningful header based on the point that each makes. Then you're going to describe your research design. So you've built this foundation for your house, and you've laid down all of these bricks, and now you're actually going to introduce to your audience your research design. Remember, it can be inductive or deductive. It's going to make a difference how you present it in your narrative based on your approach. In your written report, this will be summarized as the body of your report and will follow the literature review. And on your methodology section in your written report, this will be summarized as the body of your report and will follow the literature review as well. This section is the second to the last and is followed by the conclusion. So by now you've built this entire foundation, you've started to build your narrative, and you've told them how you're going to put everything in place. Now, how are you going to actually operationalize it? This is the important part of what I wrote on, what I had you do on the midterm, is if you're doing a descriptive analysis, your descriptive analysis was part of the research design, and now your methodology is how you're actually going to carry that out. This will be 2 pages of your research project describing what you're actually going to do, or what your analysis of the research of others has brought you to in your conclusion. And then your final page is your conclusion. Go back and reread your abstract and your introduction before composing your conclusion. Very, very important. If you, as I say, this is where you wrap it up and tie it with a bow. This is where you put the gift wrapping on it before you give it to your audience. And this is what says, man, I'm satisfied after reading this 8 or 10 page research paper. I'm really satisfied. I'm leaving as a satisfied customer because I invested all of this time reading this, and it's taken you all the way back. You got hooked into this by reading the abstract and the introduction paragraph and the thesis statement, and that was fascinating to you, and you thought, wow, what is this person going to tell me in this regard, because I am really interested based on what I read in the abstract. The conclusion takes them back to that satisfied moment when they embarked on this journey and said, you know what, it was worth it. So go back and reread your abstract and your introduction before composing the conclusion. What did you lead the reader to expect in the introduction and in the abstract? To write the conclusion, justify whether you have met the reader's expectations and explain how you did that. In your written report, as I mentioned, this is the final page. So this is how I put titles in my papers, how I would recommend you do that as well. There's an image of this on Blackboard for you to download. Don't copy everything on here. The bold underlined sections are essential. You can use those as section headings as you want, because that will probably guide you. But as it relates to these italics, these subsection headings that are in italics, don't copy them. Put your own wording together for this, maybe with the exception of the research question. But I would just assume I have to see something that says, oh, okay, here's the research question, highlight it, so that as I'm scanning through your paper, or if I'm reading through the paper, I can leaf back to it and say, oh, okay, there's the research question. It's got its own section or subsection. And so that, and outline here, what I mean by outline here is outline the research design so that it kind of sets the ball up for the literature review to follow. So this will be the segue that says, oh, okay, this is my research design. Now I'm going to tell you what the work of others has taught me so that I know what I'm doing here, and then I'm going to get into the methodology section. Okay, I've given you examples of the rubrics that I use to grade you, because on your almost finished draft, I'm mostly interested into whether you have done a good job of getting up to the conclusion. I don't want you to put in the work of writing your methodology section and your conclusion. You notice on here the conclusion doesn't even enter into my point or wording of points, and the methodology section is only worth 3 points. So I don't want you to really invest anything on your conclusion. If you can wait until I'm back from Romania, if it's in the summer 2014 semester, get this to me as your almost finished draft, and then don't work on your final project. Now, if you need to work ahead and you want to work ahead, I'm not going to hold you accountable at this stage in time, and also I'm not going to be that severe when I grade your conclusion and methodology section, because the rubric for the final draft here puts a great deal of emphasis on the methodology section. There's 4 points for a methodology section, 5 points for whether you got your conclusion good. But as it relates to the almost finished draft, my focus is on a whole different section up here at the beginning of your research project and the design and the way you put it together. And so that will hold true as far as your presentation goes as well. And so the rubric will be up for the presentation. But if you want to work ahead, what I want you to do is get all of this ready, get it put together. Essentially, what you could submit to me is your almost finished draft, and call it your finished research project. So if you want to just do one document as though it's a finished document, I will grade it as though it is following each one of these sequences. And then I will get back to you and say, here, change this and I will grade the next section, change this and I will change the next section. And it should be very, very minor little changes, and that you'll get back to you in the early part of July. You shouldn't have to put a whole lot of other work into it. If you give me what you think is a final draft, I will grade it and get it back to you with 1-day, 2-day turnarounds as it relates to finishing up your presentation, finishing up your almost finished draft, and finishing up your final project. We can work back and forth on that. But you could write this and get it almost complete and submit it to me as soon as you want, if you feel qualified to do that. And that's what this video is about. This video is about getting you to that point where you feel comfortable writing the entire 8 to 10 page paper. But this is what I'm describing now, is how I will grade it in stages so that it's fair to you and give you enough feedback. But the turnaround that we have back and forth as you finish it should be 1 or 2 days, and should require a very minimal amount of additional work if you want to go to this kind of work and get it all ready for me, so that what you send me first and foremost is what you think is a really good presentation and what you think is a really good final draft. But I will treat it through the grading process as a work in progress and be very fair with you. This is what you actually get to when you click on the Content Research Project folder on the left sidebar of Blackboard. You'll get the outline subfolder. The almost finished draft rubric is in this folder here. The final draft rubric is in this folder here. But these documents are what I'm going to focus on now. Hints for securing full marks on written work, and the research paper section and subsection headings. This is my suggestion. So that's the document that that I showed you previously that gave you the section headings for your research project written work. So I want to focus now on this hints for securing full marks. As it relates to your abstract, does your abstract neatly summarize the entire article? A good abstract will have the entire conclusion section of your paper summarized in a single sentence. Think in your mind, how am I going to give my reader or my audience the satisfaction when they finish this? And then write that into your abstract. Remember, you're going to come back to this when you write your conclusion and wrap it and put a bow on it, okay? Most people will rewrite their abstract 3 times. You'll write it the first time when you begin the project, just as an exercise, getting your mind wrapped around it. When they finish their first draft, they will revise their abstract, and then when they finish their final paper, they will revise their abstract a 3rd time. Do you have a good thesis statement? So this is part 2. The opening paragraph is typically your thesis paragraph, and your thesis statement is the last line of that opening paragraph. So I want you to write a really good paragraph and then think in your mind, after I'm done all of this work, what is the one idea I want my reader to take away? And put that into 1 sentence at the end of your opening paragraph. That is your thesis sentence. Your thesis statement needs to suggest what you will have in your hook. So when you're doing your presentation, what are you going to do to hook your audience so that they're paying attention? And then your thesis statement needs to have elements of that hook in it. And then your research question also has to have elements in the thesis statement. So what are you going to ask in your research question? How can you touch on that research question in this 1 sentence? And also it will have elements of your hypothesis or your hypotheses in it as well. So you have to capture all of those things in 1 sentence and put it at the end of the opening paragraph. And that's where it belongs. Your conclusion needs to respond to this thesis statement when you close the paper, wrap it up, and tie it with a bow. Okay, section 3, part 3 of your of the hints document. You cannot have too many section headers and subsection headers. Okay, section headers will be in bold with an underline. Those are a minimum. That's what I've given you in the template. And then the subsection headers will be italics and not bold. It makes it almost impossible for me to grade a paper without at least these headers to guide me through your work. I cannot be looking all through the unbroken document for a research question or a hypothesis or your literature review. If I don't find them under logical section headers, you might get a 0 for that section based on the rubric which I provided you if I can't find what I'm looking for. So I don't have the luxury of time to go back and read your work 3 or 4 times to find out where you buried your research question or your hypotheses if you didn't make them into clear section breaks. Part number 4, your in-text citations must be in APA style. That was part of assignment number 4. Make sure that you do your citations properly at the end of the document, and make sure you do proper in-text citations for them as well. My published work in an inline citation, in an in-text citation, would look like Leavitt 2013 page number. If there is no author listed for a document, this is part of what you learned in assignment number 4, make sure you cite it properly. If it has no author, it better be a really good source material that stands on its own merit, such as an official government site. Part number 5, if you make any kind of a claim that you imagine someone might dispute you over, you need to make a citation on that claim. And it's very tempting to make a claim because we do it in speech all the time. And it's very casual at a dinner conversation. We'll say, but I remember this study which said that there is a high incarceration rate for blacks. You can't make that statement in a research paper without saying who said it. You saying it alone is not sufficient. You have to support your claim with the claim that somebody else made in a peer-reviewed publication source. Or if you're stating what you read in a newspaper article, or according to the Wall Street Journal, if you make a statement that the Wall Street Journal published something and you don't tell people where to go, they can't verify whether you're lying or not. And it's important to put the weight behind that of the actual citation itself. Okay, part number 6, above all else, your research question should be clearly marked with a subsection header so that I know where I'm looking for it. That is the one section that I almost always have trouble finding with student papers, so make sure there's a section heading for your research questions. Your literature review needs to cover at least 2 peer-reviewed sources in the following way. Use a subsection heading to capture the point that each peer-reviewed source will make. Don't put the peer-reviewed article title in as a subsection heading. Tell me what the substance of the peer-reviewed journal is that you're going after, and use that as a subsection heading. Point number 4, provide the secondary data you have as a table, chart, or figure in your paper. That infographic that you used in your presentation to capture the visual appeal of the research needs to also appear in your paper somewhere. So I want to see a chart or an infographic properly cited in your research paper as well. Part number 8. In your almost finished draft, the methodology section can be as short as 2 paragraphs, and that can explain, all I need that to do is explain to me the outline of what you will discuss in detail in your final draft. That will get you the 3 points that I've awarded in the rubric for the almost finished draft, and you don't even need to have a conclusion written when you do your almost finished draft. Because if you want to wait for my feedback on your almost finished draft before you put the time and energy into a methodology section and a conclusion, that's fine for me. Tell me where you want to go with your methodology, and I will award 3 points for that, and in the final draft you will get 5 points for your methodology section, 5 or 6 points, I can't remember, for the conclusion. Other than cleaning up the deficiencies noted in your returned and graded almost finished draft, this and the conclusion section, the methodology section and the conclusion section, is where most of the work in the final project will be focused. Hints for improving your grade on your final report: the methodology section needs to outline your own unique ideas as they relate to the peer-reviewed articles covered in your literature review. Remember, you're building a foundation, and then you're building toward a new research conclusion with your methodology section, and then you're supporting that and saying, this is what I learned, and this is what I've taught you based on this research that I've done. Okay, experience with prior students' research projects has shown that for this class, almost all reports have a heavy qualitative research methods component to them. So make sure that you approach it as qualitative data. If you pull at least a couple of paragraphs from the textbook chapters, your grade in your final project will go up at least a point grade. I want you to use the textbook as a citation source and or use this textbook vocabulary and tell me where you pulled this section from and say, you know, because this is a descriptive research paper that I'm citing, it's describing this population better, and say what, and if you want to cite that section of the Adams and Lawrence textbook, then that tells me, yeah, this person learned something from the textbook, which we had. Part number 2 for this section is your conclusion needs to connect the entire report, especially the literature review and the methodology, back to your thesis statement. Remember that final sentence of your opening paragraph. Your conclusion goes back to that and says, this is what I told you I was going to tell you, and now, see, I told you that. And that's what your conclusion does. Ensure that you responded to your research question very specifically, typically by restating your research question in your conclusion and then answering it. And so go back and say, as the research question asked, comma, blah, 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 this has now concluded, this research now supports my claim that the answer is blah, blah, blah. Okay, point number 3, state very clearly whether each of your hypotheses are either supported or alternatively if the null hypothesis is supported. So you need to use the word supported or rejected. I reject the null, or I failed to support my hypothesis, or I have supported, the null remains supported by this research. That's it, and good luck on your research projects. Like I said, you can either submit it by the deadlines that are provided in the syllabus, and I will get it back to you. Remember, there are first look deadlines, so if you want to go all the way to the end of the semester, that's fine, and you can just follow the syllabus. But if you want to get done early, then what you can do is just actually write me the full research project, and I will go back and forth with you and do my grading 24 hours, 48 hours apart, based on these steps. So I will work with you based on a finished project so that you don't have anything else to do. So you can either get the outline to me and then wait for my return, get the presentation to me and wait for my return, get the almost finished draft and wait for my return, or just do the full presentation, do the research paper, be done with it, and when I get back from Romania we'll work back and forth to actually go through the grading process very, very quickly in 1 or 2 day turnarounds. And either way, I'm good to work with you.